Okay, the first thing I'm going to do, or have already done, is push my two pins up from the other side, and that is going to give me something to grip on to pull the pins completely out, which is going to separate the upper and the lower receiver. I dry fired my gun, so the hammer is up in the up position, and if it wasn't, you would just need to hold the hammer while you pull the trigger and ease it up to where it needs to sit. Alright, the first thing I'm going to do is push the hammer pin through the receiver. I'm holding the hammer down because it's under pressure, and I pushed it through and it clicked. And here's the hammer. Okay, I'm going to take the trigger pin and I'm going to push it through, and it may require you to put some pressure on the trigger on the inside of the receiver while you're pushing it. Look how easy it came out. Because the trigger is under pressure, so by putting a little pressure on the trigger as you're pushing the pin through is going to help it keep from getting bound up on anything. And here is the trigger. Okay, looks like it's getting hung up on my safety selector. Okay, what I figured out is that you have to take the selector out to take the trigger out, and I've already got the handle taken off, and you'll just want to pull this handle, wiggle it straight down, because you have a spring here here's your detent, and it looks like the flat end was down, showing out of the gun, out of the receiver, and the pointed end was inside the receiver. So be sure you keep that in mind as you take the handle off the lower receiver. And then your safety selector switch, it will fall out practically. And you pull that out, and then your trigger should come right out. So you do have to take the handle off to take the safety selector out to take the trigger out. And here's the standard factory trigger. Okay, on your Geisselel trigger, it came with a pin. That pin is to push your pin that came with your trigger out. So we're going to swap out the pins that came with the kit to take the original pin out of the trigger. Okay, before you put your trigger in, don't forget you need to put some of the oil lubricant that come with your trigger into the pinhole. Okay, I have my trigger spring replaced. It came with a little heavier duty spring, and it also came with a little thinner, lighter spring. I went ahead and swapped those springs out, and I'm ready to drop this into my lower receiver. And what I'm going to do is line this pin up with my trigger pin on the receiver. And the spring, you're going to have to push it down to where it needs to go, and then line up your pins. And then the pin that you took out earlier, you're going to push it back through. Okay, I finally got it started through. It's going to take some wiggling to line the pin up on both sides of the receiver, and then once you do that, you should be able to push the original pin back in. And I just pushed it in flush with the receiver on both sides. Okay, I have my hammer here, and what I need to do is take the pin out of it to install it into the receiver. So I just pushed one side out a little bit. Hopefully I can get a grip on the other side and pull it out. Okay, here's the pin. So once I have my hammer pin out, I put oil or lubricant that came with the trigger inside the pinhole, and I'm going to place the hammer into the receiver with the spring legs on top of the trigger pin. So I'm going to place it inside just like this, and it's going to be under pressure, so you're going to have to push the hammer in as you put your pin in. Alright, I had to put the receiver on my side here to hold the hammer down and align it where I could at least start one side of the pin. Okay, it did take me a little bit to get the hammer pin in, and it got about halfway in and it just wouldn't go all the way, so I took the pin that came into the kit that we use for the trigger pin, and I put it on the other side and tried to help me align the hammer a little bit. Then it worked really well. Oh, actually next we're going to lube all the contact points where the hammer and the trigger touch. Okay, to get the safety selector in, you will have to cock the hammer back onto the trigger, because if you don't, the trigger, if you can see in there, is up just enough where the trigger selector won't go in. So if you, and I'll try to do this where you can see, if you hammer it back, you see the back of the trigger, it went down inside the receiver. So that's what you're going to have to do to get your safety selector in. So that should slide right in real easy with no problem. So what we're going to need to do now is turn it over, put our pin and spring in. Here's my pin into the hole. And I don't know if it'll be easier to put the spring into the handle or not. I'm going to try that and see. So it looks like the handle spring is going to go, looks like it's going to go right here in that hole right there. So I'm just going to let it sit there. Okay, I got it started. So the spring's inside both ends, so I'm going to wiggle it up. And the spring is not going in where it needs to go. So I'm going to get something here and try to, there we go. So be sure that spring is where it needs to be before you push that handle all the way up. I'm trying to do this whole camera, film, and do this. It's kind of hard to do. Okay, it looks like it's in where it needs to be. So I'm going to go ahead and finish pushing that on in. And go ahead and put my handle Allen head bolt back in. It's safety zone, so the trigger will not release the hammer, so you definitely want to be sure that's the case. So I'm going to take the safety off, hold the hammer, release the hammer, and put the upper back onto the lower and go from there.